Welcome back, everyone. It looks like you've all been doing a ton of research on iron.
Yeah, seems like it.
We got a huge stack of notes, and a lot of it is focusing on this thing. Total iron binding capacity, or TIBC for short.
Yep.
So we're going to do a deep dive into that today, see what it means.
That's good.
So when we talk about TIBC, we're not talking about, like, measuring the iron directly.
Right.
We're looking at the blood's ability to carry iron.
Exactly.
Throughout the body. So, like, if you imagine, instead of, like, counting all the packages on a delivery truck, you're just looking at how much space is on the truck.
That's a great analogy.
So my TIBC is high.
Okay.
Does that mean my body is doing a good job moving iron around?
Not necessarily. I mean, a high TIBC could mean that there's plenty of room for iron to be transported.
Okay.
But there might not actually be enough iron to fill that space.
Oh.
It could actually be a sign that your body's struggling to get enough iron, and it's trying to maximize its ability to grab onto any iron it can find.
So a high TIBC could point toward iron deficiency anemia,
Yeah.
where the body just isn't getting enough iron.
Exactly. And conversely, if your TIBC is low, it could mean that your iron transporters are already full,
Okay.
or that your body isn't producing enough of them in the first place.
So that makes sense for iron deficiency. But what about other conditions? Would a low TIBC ever be a cause for concern?
It definitely can be. For example, in a condition like hemochromatosis, where the body absorbs too much iron,
Right.
we often see a low TIBC.
Interesting.
It's a little bit counterintuitive, but in this case, the liver, which is responsible for producing those iron transporters, actually scales back production because it's overwhelmed by the excess iron.
So we've got high TIBC potentially linked to iron deficiency anemia and low TIBC possibly signaling something like hemochromatosis.
Right.
So if a doctor sees one of those numbers on your lab report, how do they use that to figure out what's going on?
Well, it's important to remember that TIBC is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to evaluating iron health.
Okay.
It'd be like trying to diagnose an engine problem just by checking the fuel gauge.
Gotcha.
There are other tests doctors use alongside TIBC to get a clearer picture.
What are some of those other tests, and how do they fit into this iron puzzle?
Well, one important test is serum iron, which actually measures the amount of iron circulating in your blood at that moment. So if TIBC is like checking the available space on the delivery truck, serum iron is like counting the packages that are actually loaded up.
Okay, got it. So we know how much space there is and how many packages are on board. What else do we need to know?
Well, another key measurement is transference saturation, which tells us what percentage of those iron transporters are actually carrying iron. You can think of it as how full the delivery truck is.
Right.
Is it packed to the brim, or is there still room for more?
Okay, that makes sense. So we got the space, the packages, and how full the truck is. Anything else we need to factor in?
Absolutely. We also need to consider the body's iron reserves.
Okay.
That's where ferritin comes in.
Okay.
Ferritin is a protein that stores iron.
Right.
So measuring ferritin levels gives us a sense of how much iron is tucked away for future use. It's like checking the warehouse inventory to see how much backup we have.
So it sounds like we've got a whole team of investigators working on this iron case. TIBC checking the transport capacity.
Right.
Serum iron counting the circulating iron.
Yep.
Transfer saturation, measuring how full the transporters are. And ferritin assessing the stored iron reserves.
Exactly. And by considering all of these factors together, doctors can piece together a really comprehensive picture of your iron status. But there's even more to the story.
Okay, so we're not done yet. This is getting interesting. I'm guessing there are other things that can impact our TIBC levels besides just how much iron we have in our bodies.
You're right. Things like age, gender, even what you eat and your overall health can influence your TIBC results.
Wow.
So let's dive into those factors next to see how they can make this iron puzzle even more fascinating.
Yeah, it's true. When it comes to interpreting those TIBC levels, there's a lot more to consider than just the number itself. It's like trying to understand a book by only reading one chapter.
So let's start filling in some of those other chapters.
Okay.
You mentioned age and gender.
Yeah.
Do our TIBC levels change as we get older?
Yeah, they can.
Or are there differences between men and women?
Both age and gender can definitely play a role. Yeah. For example, newborns tend to have much higher TIBC levels.
Okay.
Which makes sense, right? Because their bodies are working overtime.
Yeah.
To build up those iron stores for growth and development.
So they come into the world ready to soak up all the iron they can get.
Exactly.
What about as we age? Do those TIBC levels stay high?
Well, generally, TIBC levels tend to decline as we get older.
Which might reflect a decrease in the body's overall iron demands.
Right.
But of course, everyone's different, and there can be lots of individual variation.
And what about those gender differences? We touched on estrogen a little bit earlier and how it can increase TIBC.
Yeah.
What about other hormonal influences?
Yeah, you're right. Estrogen does tend to increase TIBC. And androgens, which are typically higher in men, may have the opposite effect. So that's why it's really essential for doctors to consider the individual's hormonal profile.
Yeah.
Especially for women who are pregnant or using hormonal contraceptives, because those hormonal shifts can significantly impact iron metabolism and TIBC levels.
It sounds like interpreting TIBC results requires a really personalized approach, taking all these individual factors into account.
Absolutely. And speaking of individual factors, let's talk about the impact of diet. What you eat, especially your iron intake, can have a big impact on your TIBC levels.
Okay, this is where it gets really practical. Let's say I'm trying to be mindful of my iron intake. If I load up on iron-rich foods, will that automatically lower my TIBC?
Well, it's not quite that simple. If your iron stores are already adequate, your body's actually pretty good at regulating how much iron it absorbs, regardless of how much you consume.
Okay.
But if you're not getting enough iron through your diet, your body might try to compensate by increasing transferrin production, which could lead to a higher TIBC.
So it's like my body is saying, hey, we need more iron here. Let's build more transporters to try to catch any iron we can.
That's a great way to put it. And this highlights the importance of understanding the different types of iron in our diet.
Okay.
Heme iron, found in animal sources like red meat, is more easily absorbed than non-heme iron, which comes from plant-based foods.
So someone with a high TIBC, potentially indicating iron deficiency,
Right.
they might want to focus on boosting their heme iron intake.
Exactly. And even when consuming non-heme iron, pairing it with vitamin C can significantly enhance absorption.
Ah, so that's why people talk about squeezing lemon on their spinach. It's all about maximizing iron absorption. But I'm curious, what about those cases where a low TIBC is the concern, perhaps indicating iron overload? What kind of dietary adjustments might be helpful there?
That's a great question, and it's where working closely with a healthcare professional becomes really crucial. While dietary changes alone might not be sufficient to manage iron overload, understanding which foods contribute to iron absorption and which ones might hinder it can be part of a comprehensive management plan. For example, tannins, which are found in tea and coffee, can inhibit iron absorption. So someone with iron overload might want to be mindful of their consumption of those beverages.
So this is making me realize just how complex iron balance really is. It's not just about taking a supplement or eating a few servings of spinach. It's about understanding how our diet, hormones, and even our age can affect our TIBC levels and overall iron status. But you mentioned one more factor earlier that I wanted to circle back to, inflammation. How does that fit into this iron puzzle?
Yeah, that's an important piece to consider as well. Both acute inflammation, like from an injury, and chronic inflammation, like that seen in certain health conditions, can impact TIBC levels. When your body is dealing with inflammation, its priority shifts to fighting that threat, and producing those iron transporters might take a back seat.
So a low TIBC in someone with an inflammatory condition might not necessarily mean they have iron overload.
Right.
It could simply reflect their body's response to that inflammation.
Exactly. It's like the body's saying, we got bigger problems to deal with right now. Let's focus on tackling this inflammation and worry about iron transport later. And this is why interpreting TIBC results in isolation can be really tricky. We need to look at the whole picture, including any underlying health conditions, to understand what those numbers truly mean.
It seems like every time we peel back a layer of this TIBC puzzle, we uncover even more complexity. But you've done a fantastic job of breaking down these factors, and you're showing us just how interconnected everything is. We've learned about age, gender, hormones, diet, and even inflammation. Are there any other big players we need to be aware of?
Well, those are some of the key factors that can influence TIBC levels. But remember, each individual is unique, and there might be other specific circumstances or health conditions that need to be taken into account.
This is all incredibly insightful. But before we get too lost in the technical details, I think it's important to bring this back to what it all means for our listeners. We've explored all the intricacies of TIBC, but how does this knowledge actually empower us to take charge of our health?
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? And I think that's where we need to shift our focus next. Let's explore how understanding TIBC can help us make informed decisions about our well-being, from dietary choices to potential interventions.
We've been talking all about TIBC, how it works,
Right.
what can influence it, and how it's used to diagnose conditions like iron deficiency anemia,
Yeah.
pneumochromatosis. Now, I'm curious, what can we actually do with this information?
Okay.
How does understanding our TIBC levels actually empower us to, take control of our health?
Yeah, that's the crucial question, isn't it?
Right.
It's one thing to, understand the science, but the real value lies in applying that knowledge
Yeah.
to actually make informed decisions
Right.
about our well-being.
So let's say someone gets their blood work back
Okay.
and they see a high TIBC,
Yeah,
which we've learned could point to iron deficiency.
right.
What's the next step?
Well, the most important thing is to talk to their doctor.
Okay.
It can be tempting to, self-diagnose
Right.
and start taking iron supplements,
Yeah.
but that can be really risky without understanding the full picture.
So you don't just want to start taking medication if you don't really need to.
Exactly.
So what if the doctor confirms iron deficiency anemia? What kind of approaches might they recommend?
Well, often, simple dietary changes
Right.
can make a big difference. Incorporating more iron-rich foods into their diet can be a great first step.
Okay.
For example, focusing on heme iron sources, like lean meats, poultry, fish.
So steak over salad?
Well, not necessarily.
Right.
It's more about understanding the difference between heme and non-heme iron.
Gotcha.
Heme iron found in animal products
Yeah.
is absorbed much more efficiently than non-heme iron,
Okay.
which comes from plants.
Right.
But that doesn't mean vegetarians and vegans can't get enough iron. It just means they might need to be more mindful of their food choices
Okay.
and consider combining those iron-rich plants with foods high in vitamin C to boost absorption.
Ah, so that's why they say squeeze lemon on your spinach.
Exactly.
It's a strategic move
Yeah.
to maximize iron uptake.
It is.
What are some other strategies?
Well, cooking in cast iron cookware can actually increase the iron content of your food.
Oh, interesting.
And avoiding consuming tea or coffee with meals can help prevent those compounds from inhibiting iron absorption.
These are great tips. It's amazing how many little things we can do to optimize our iron intake. What about those cases where diet alone isn't enough?
Well, if the iron deficiency is severe,
Right.
or if dietary changes aren't making enough of a difference,
Yeah.
a doctor might recommend iron supplements.
Okay.
There are different types of iron supplements available, and the best choice will depend on individual factors,
Okay.
like the severity of the deficiency,
Right.
any underlying health conditions, and tolerance to different formulations.
So even when it comes to something like iron supplements,
Right.
there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely. It's always best to work with a healthcare professional to determine the right course of action.
Let's flip the script for a second.
Okay.
What if someone has low TIBC,
Yeah.
potentially indicating iron overload?
Right.
What kind of interventions might be considered in those situations?
Again, the first step is to consult with a doctor
Okay.
to determine the underlying cause. If it's hemochromatosis, for example,
Right.
treatment often involves therapeutic phlebotomy.
Phlebotomy, that sounds a little intense.
Yeah.
What does that involve?
It's actually a fairly simple procedure
Okay.
where blood is drawn, much like when you donate blood.
Yeah.
But in this case, the goal is to remove excess iron from the body.
So it's like hitting the reset button on those overloaded iron transporters.
That's a good way to think about it.
So it seems counterintuitive to remove blood when
Yeah.
we're talking about iron overload.
Right.
But it can be an effective way to manage the condition
Yeah, often it is.
and prevent long-term complications from that iron buildup.
Exactly.
This has been a fascinating journey
It has.
into the world of iron
Uh-huh.
and TIBC.
Yeah.
It's amazing how such a simple number
Right.
on a lab report
Mhm.
can reveal so much about our health.
It really does highlight the interconnectedness of our bodies.
Yeah.
Iron plays such a critical role in so many processes,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding our TIBC levels is just one piece of the puzzle
Right.
in optimizing our overall well-being.
So we're wrapping up our deep dive today.
Okay.
What's the most important takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
I think the key message is this. knowledge is empowering.
Yeah.
By understanding TIBC and the factors that influence it, we can make more informed choices about our diet,
Right.
our lifestyle, and even when to seek medical advice.
It's about moving beyond those numbers on a lab report.
Yeah.
Seeing them as like valuable clues
Exactly.
that can guide us on our health journey.
It's about taking ownership of our health and becoming active participants in our own well-being.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
It is.
We hope this episode has empowered you to continue exploring the fascinating world of iron and its impact on your health. Until next time, stay curious and keep those iron levels balanced.
Agrees.
You've been listening to the Learning Podcast, a production of metaNESTA. Remember, learning is a journey. One step, one insight, one skill at a time. We'll see you next time. Keep learning, stay curious, and as always, be awesome.